Hi, I'm Machine Pun Kelly, and thanks for watching. Today, we're diving into the history of Gaza, Israel, and the occupied territories, a story of land, identity, and conflict that shaped one of the world's most enduring disputes. As you go through this, you might have a question about who or what a law, a person, a conflict, or a group is. So I've created a playlist with over 80 rabbit holes you can jump down. Additionally, in the description, you'll find a link to my SubStack, which provides links to sources to confirm the substance of what's in the video. So with that, let's dive in. From ancient coexistence to modern warfare, we'll explore how we got here, covering violent clashes since World War II, the Jewish presence across the Muslim world, assassinations that stalled peace, American Christian support for Zionism, charges of apartheid and genocide, Iran's role, and the distinct groups like the PLO, Hamas, and Hezbollah. We'll also address calls for Jewish annihilation, why both sides feel so threatened, and the deep human emotions driving this, all while aiming to stay objective. Let's dive in. Clearing a myth, ancient coexistence, not conflict. Let's start by debunking a common myth, the idea that Arabs and Jews have been killing each other in Palestine for thousands of years. That's simply not true. For centuries, Jewish and Arab communities lived side by side in this region, sometimes with tensions over resources or religious sites, but not in constant warfare. In fact, they often united against external invaders, like the Christian Crusaders who swept through the Middle East in the 11th to 13th centuries, targeting both Muslims and Jews with violence. These shared struggles forged moments of solidarity, not endless hatred. The intense Arab-Jewish conflict we see today is a modern creation, born from political, economic, and nationalist forces that took root in the 19th century. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to those early seeds of change. Jews in the Muslim world, a lost presence. Before focusing on Palestine, let's widen the lens to the broader Muslim world, where Jewish communities once played a vital role. From Morocco to Iraq, from Yemen to Persia, Jews were woven into the fabric of Islamic societies for over 1,000 years. In the early 1900s, over 1 million Jews lived in Muslim-majority countries, thriving as merchants, scholars, poets, and artisans. In cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Tehran, they built vibrant neighborhoods, synagogues, and schools, contributing to cultural and economic life. While they faced occasional discrimination as a religious minority, Islamic law often protected them as people of the book, granting rights to practice their faith and live among Muslims. But the 20th century changed everything. The rise of Arab nationalism, the emergence of Zionism, and the establishment of Israel in 1948 shifted the ground beneath these communities. In many countries, Jews were increasingly seen as outsiders, suspected of loyalty to the new Jewish state. In Iran, for example, about 80,000 Jews lived in relative harmony in the early 1900s, integrated into Persian society. But after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the new regime under Ayatollah Khomeini branded Jews as enemies of Islam, accusing them of ties to Zionism or Western imperialism. Harassment, property confiscation, and fear drove most to flee, many to Israel or the United States. By 2023, fewer than 9,000 Jews remained in Iran, a shadow of their former presence. This pattern repeated across the region. In Iraq, a Jewish community of 150,000 in 1948 dwindled to fewer than 10 by 2023, as state policies and mob violence pushed them out after Israel's creation. Egypt's 75,000 Jews shrank to under 100, with similar stories in Yemen, Syria, and Morocco, BBC. Between 1948 and the 1970s, over 2 million Jews from Muslim countries migrated to Israel, forming a significant portion of its population. These exoduses weren't just personal tragedies. They reshaped the Middle East, emptying it of ancient communities and fueling Israel's demographic growth while deepening Arab resentment toward Zionism. The loss of these Jewish communities mirrors the Palestinian displacement we'll explore, highlighting parallel stories of uprooting and loss. Now let's zoom in on Palestine, part of the Ottoman Empire in the mid-1800s. Back then, the region was home to about 300,000 people, mostly Arab Muslims, with a small Jewish minority of 10,000 to 15,000, concentrated in holy cities like Jerusalem, Safed, and Hebron Jewish Virtual Library. These Jews, often religious scholars or pilgrims, maintained a continuous presence tied to their faith, living alongside Arabs in relative peace, though local disputes over markets or holy sites sometimes flared. Life was stable, but about to change dramatically. In 1858, the Ottoman Empire introduced the Land Code, a reform to modernize its economy by requiring landowners to register their property, Palestinian Academic Society. This shift from communal to individual ownership sounded simple, but had profound effects. Many Palestinian peasants, who worked the land but didn't legally own it, couldn't afford the registration fees or navigate the complex bureaucracy. Wealthy elites, including absentee landlords living in cities like Beirut or Damascus, took advantage, acquiring vast tracts of land. These landlords later sold much of this land to Jewish immigrants, creating opportunities for settlement that would reshape Palestine's future. The law wasn't designed to harm Palestinians, but its unintended consequences opened the door to demographic and political shifts. At the same time, the idea of nationalism was sweeping across the world, redefining how people saw themselves and their futures. In Europe, nationalist movements pushed for unified states like Italy and Germany, emphasizing shared language, culture, and sovereignty. In Palestine, a budding Palestinian identity took shape, rooted in Arab culture, Islamic heritage, and a deep connection to the land, as locals began to envision themselves as a distinct people with a right to self-rule. Across Europe, Jewish communities, battered by centuries of persecution, developed their own nationalist response, Zionism. Zionism was born from a desperate need for safety. For 1,900 years, Jews faced relentless anti-Semitism, from Roman expulsions to medieval massacres. In the 14th century, during the Black Death, Jews were scapegoated for the plague, accused of poisoning wells or spreading disease. Entire communities were burned alive or driven out, with massacres in Germany, France, and Spain. Expulsions followed, from England in 1290 to Spain in 1492, leaving Jews as eternal wanderers. By the 19th century, anti-Semitism took modern forms. Pseudo-scientific racism branded Jews as a threat to society, and economic crises saw them blamed for banking failures or unemployment. In the Russian Empire, Jews were confined to a region called the Pale of Settlement, where pogroms, violent mob attacks, erupted regularly. The 1881 assassination of Tsar Alexander II sparked waves of pogroms, killing thousands and displacing tens of thousands. This unending persecution gave rise to Zionism. Intellectuals like Theodor Herzl, witnessing pogroms and systemic hatred, argued that Jews needed a homeland to escape danger. Palestine, with its biblical significance, became the focal point. By the 1880s, the first Aliyah brought thousands of Jewish immigrants, fleeing Russian violence and inspired by nationalist dreams. Zionist organizations purchased land, often from those Ottoman landlords, building farming communities like Petah Tikva and Rishon LeZion. These early settlers laid the groundwork for a growing Jewish presence, but their arrival sparked unease among Palestinians who saw their land and future slipping away. By the start of World War II in 1939, the Jewish population in Palestine had soared to around 450,000, 30 times the 1850 figure, within a total population of about 1.5 million. The combination of Ottoman land laws, Zionist nationalism, and European anti-Semitism drove this transformation, setting the stage for conflict. To understand why Jews kept coming to Palestine, we need to dwell on anti-Semitism's brutal history. This wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. It was a 1,900-year campaign of exclusion, violence, and scapegoating that left Jews with nowhere else to go. In the Middle Ages, they were blamed for everything from plagues to economic woes, often with deadly consequences. The Black Death massacres were a low point, but the pattern continued. Jews were expelled from England in 1290, France in 1306, and Spain in 1492, their property confiscated, their lives upended. The Spanish Inquisition forced conversions or exile, scattering Sephardic Jews across the Mediterranean. In the 19th century, anti-Semitism modernized, but didn't soften. The 1894 Dreyfus Affair in France, where a Jewish officer was falsely convicted of treason, exposed deep-seated hatred even in liberal societies. In Russia, the 1903 Kishinev pogrom killed 49 Jews, injured hundreds, and shocked the world, galvanizing Zionist calls for a homeland. The 1905 pogroms, following Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, killed thousands more, with entire villages burned. After World War I, Jews were blamed for Germany's loss, fueling the rise of Nazism. The Holocaust, from 1933 to 1945, killed 6 million Jews, two-thirds of Europe's Jewish population, in a genocide that shook the world. But even after the war, anti-Semitism didn't vanish. In 1946, the Kielce pogrom in Poland killed 42 Jewish Holocaust survivors, proving nowhere was safe. This history of being hunted, from medieval scapegoating to modern genocide, made Zionism more than an idea. It was a necessity. When the UN debated Palestine's future in 1947, Jewish survivors were languishing in European displaced persons camps, facing hostility from locals and governments. Palestine, and later Israel, became their last refuge, a place where they could finally control their own destiny. But this dream of safety collided with Palestinian aspirations, creating a tragedy of competing rights. World War I brought seismic changes to the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was crumbling, and Britain saw a chance to expand its influence. In 1915 and 1916, the Hussein McMahon Correspondence, a series of letters between British High Commissioner Sir Henry McMahon and Sharif Hussein of Mecca, promised Arab independence in exchange for an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. The letters suggested Palestine would be part of an independent Arab state, though the boundaries were vague. Arabs, expecting self-rule, joined the fight, helping Britain defeat the Ottomans. But in 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, a brief document with massive consequences. It pledged support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while promising to protect the rights of non-Jewish communities. This promise, driven by Zionist lobbying and Britain's desire to win Jewish support during the war, directly contradicted the Hussein McMahon pledges. For Palestinians, it was a betrayal. For Jews, it was a glimmer of hope amid escalating persecution in Europe. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, Britain took control of Palestine under the British Mandate in 1917. The conflicting promises, Arab independence versus a Jewish homeland, created a diplomatic mess. Jewish immigration surged, especially as Nazi Germany's rise intensified anti-Semitism. By 1933, Hitler's policies stripped German Jews of citizenship, jobs, and safety, driving thousands to Palestine with skills and capital that strengthened the Jewish community. But this influx alarmed Palestinians, who feared losing their land and identity. Clashes erupted, like the 1929 Hebron massacre, where 67 Jews were killed by Arab rioters, and the 1936-39 Arab Revolt, a full-scale uprising against British policy and Jewish immigration. Palestinian fighters attacked British and Jewish targets, demanding independence. Britain crushed the revolt, killing thousands and exiling leaders, while Jewish militias like the Haganah and Irgun grew more organized, fighting both Arabs and British. The region was on the brink. World War II amplified Jewish desperation. The Holocaust decimated Europe's Jewish population, killing 6 million in death camps, ghettos, and mass executions. Survivors, emerging from hiding or concentration camps, found no welcome in their former homes. In 1946, pogroms in Poland and elsewhere killed dozens of returning Jews, reinforcing the Zionist argument that only a Jewish state could ensure safety. In 1947, the United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem as an international city. Jewish leaders, seeing it as their last chance after centuries of persecution, accepted the plan. Most Arab leaders rejected it, arguing it gave disproportionate land to the Jewish minority, who owned less than 10% of the territory despite their population growth, to 450,000. When Britain withdrew in May 1948, the Jewish community declared Israel's independence. War broke out immediately. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq joined Palestinian fighters against Israel. Israel's forces, better armed and organized, prevailed, capturing 78% of historic Palestine, far more than the UN plan allocated. For Palestinians, this was the Nakba, or catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled, becoming refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, and neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. Hundreds of villages were destroyed, their olive groves uprooted, their homes razed. Gaza, a narrow 25-mile coastal strip, fell under Egyptian control, while Jordan annexed the West Bank. These areas became overcrowded refugee hubs, with camps like Jabalia and Shati housing tens of thousands in squalid conditions, often without clean water, schools, or hope. For Jews, Israel's creation was a miracle, a homeland after 1,900 years of exile and slaughter. The influx of Jewish refugees from Muslim countries fleeing post-1948 violence swelled Israel's population, with over 2 million arriving by the 1970s. But for Palestinians, the Nakba was a wound that never healed, a dispossession that mirrored the Jewish expulsions from places like Iran and Iraq. Both sides saw themselves as victims of history, fighting for survival on the same land. The decades after 1948 saw a series of violent conflicts that deepened the divide, each leaving scars that made peace harder to achieve. Let's walk through the major clashes, understanding their impact on both sides. In 1956, the Suez Crisis erupted when Israel, allied with Britain and France, invaded Egypt's Sinai Peninsula and Gaza to secure the Suez Canal and counter Egyptian support for Palestinian guerrillas. The invasion succeeded militarily, but international pressure, led by the United States and Soviet Union, forced Israel to withdraw. The brief occupation of Gaza showed Israel's growing military strength, but also Palestinian resilience as Egypt regained control. The 1967 Six-Day War was a turning point. Tensions had been building. Egypt blockaded the Straits of Tiran, Syria shelled northern Israel, and Jordan mobilized troops. Fearing an imminent attack, Israel launched a preemptive strike, effectively destroying the air forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan within hours, shifting the balance of power in the region. In 6 days, Israel captured Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. This stunning victory tripled Israel's territory, but placed over 1 million Palestinians under military occupation. The occupied territories were born, governed by Israeli authorities under international law, which required protecting the Palestinian population while prohibiting permanent settlement by Israelis. For Israelis, the war was a miracle of survival. For Palestinians, it was a second Nakba, as their hopes for statehood faded under occupation, increasing tensions and resentment. The 1973 Yom Kippur War caught Israel off guard. On the holiest Jewish day, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack to reclaim lost territories. Initial Arab gains stunned Israel, but its forces rallied, pushing back both armies. The war killed over 2,600 Israelis and 15,000 Arabs, shaking Israel's sense of invincibility and prompting Egypt to later seek peace. For Palestinians, the war showed Arab solidarity, but yielded no gains as Gaza and the West Bank remained occupied. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to expel the PLO, which had launched attacks from Beirut, marking a significant escalation in the ongoing regional conflict. The war culminated in the Sabra and Shatila massacre, where Christian militias under Israeli oversight brutally killed between 2,000 and 3,500 Palestinian refugees in Beirut refugee camps. The Sabra and Shatila massacre horrified the world, leading to widespread Israeli protests and significantly damaging Israel's international moral standing in the aftermath of the conflict. For Palestinians, the Sabra and Shatila massacre was a brutal reminder of their vulnerability, even outside Palestine, highlighting the ongoing struggles and lack of effective protection for Palestinian refugees in camps and surrounding areas. The First Intifada, from 1987 to 1993, was a grassroots Palestinian uprising against occupation. Youth threw stones at Israeli soldiers, who responded with tear gas, arrests, and live fire. Over 1,000 Palestinians and 160 Israelis died, and images of children facing tanks won global sympathy for Palestinians. The Intifada forced Israel to negotiate, leading to the Oslo Accords, but it also birthed Hamas, a militant Islamist group that rejected compromise. The Second Intifada, from 2000 to 2005, was far bloodier. Triggered by Israeli leader Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount, seen as provocative, it saw Palestinian suicide bombings kill over 1,000 Israeli civilians in buses, cafes, and markets. Israel responded with military incursions, curfews, and assassinations, killing over 3,000 Palestinians. Gaza and the West Bank became war zones, with trust between the sides shattered. The Gaza Wars, from 2008 to 2021, centered on Hamas, which took control of Gaza in 2007. In 2008-09, Operation Cast Lead killed 1,400 Palestinians, including 300 children, and 13 Israelis, as Israel targeted Hamas rocket sites. In 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense killed 170 Palestinians and 6 Israelis. The 2014 Operation Protective Edge was the deadliest, killing 2,200 Palestinians, including 550 children and 73 Israelis, with entire Gaza neighborhoods leveled. In 2021, Operation Guardian of the Walls killed 260 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. Hamas's rockets, often indiscriminate, targeted Israeli civilians, while Israel's airstrikes caused massive civilian casualties, drawing accusations of disproportion. These wars entrenched a cycle of retaliation with no clear winner. Assassinations on both sides have repeatedly derailed peace efforts, turning moments of hope into cycles of vengeance. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who signed the Oslo Accords, promising Palestinian autonomy, was assassinated by a Jewish extremist opposed to land concessions. His death halted momentum, empowering hardliners who slowed the peace process. On the Palestinian side, Israel's targeted killings of leaders have had similar effects. In 1988, the PLO's Khalil al-Wazir, a key negotiator, was killed in Tunis, disrupting early talks. In 1996, Hamas's Yahya Ayyash, a bomb maker, was assassinated, prompting revenge attacks. In 2004, Hamas founder Ahmed Yassin was killed in a missile strike, hardening the group's stance. Most recently, in 2024, Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran, attributed to Israel, prompting vows of retaliation. Each assassination convinced one side that the other couldn't be trusted, making dialogue feel like a betrayal of the dead. Palestinian struggle involves distinct groups with unique goals and methods, often confused in public discourse. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, founded in 1964, has long been the main voice of Palestinian nationalism. Led by Yasser Arafat's Fatah faction, it initially sought Israel's destruction through armed struggle, but shifted to diplomacy in the 1980s. In 1993, the PLO recognized Israel's right to exist under the Oslo Accords, embracing a two-state solution based on 1967 borders. Today, it governs parts of the West Bank through the Palestinian Authority, though it's criticized for corruption and ineffectiveness. Hamas, formed in 1987 during the First Intifada, is an Islamist group rooted in the Muslim Brotherhood. Its 1988 charter called for Israel's destruction and jihad against Jews, though a 2017 revision suggested openness to a state within 1967 borders. Hamas governs Gaza since 2007, using rockets, tunnels, and suicide attacks to resist Israel. Its mix of social services, like schools and hospitals, and militancy has won support among Gazans frustrated with the PLO's failures. Hezbollah, a Lebanese Shia militia, is distinct but linked. Formed in 1982 with Iran's support, it fights Israel to support Palestinians and resist Western influence. Its 2006 war with Israel killed 1,200 Lebanese and 160 Israelis, showcasing its military strength. Backed by Iran, Hezbollah's arsenal of rockets and fighters poses a major threat to Israel, often coordinating with Hamas but operating from Lebanon. The PLO's diplomacy contrasts with Hamas and Hezbollah's militancy, but all share a goal of Palestinian liberation, complicated by differing ideologies and external patrons like Iran. A unique factor in this conflict is the role of American Christian Zionists, particularly evangelical Christians who support Israel for theological reasons. Since the 19th century, dispensationalist Christians have believed that the return of Jews to Palestine and the restoration of Israel fulfill biblical prophecies, paving the way for Christ's second coming. By 2023, over 20 million U.S. evangelicals, roughly 40% of the evangelical population, strongly support Israel. Groups like Christians United for Israel lobby for military and economic aid, contributing to the $3.8 billion the U.S. provides Israel annually. This support gives Israel a military edge, from fighter jets to the Iron Dome missile defense system, but it frustrates Palestinians, who see it as enabling occupation and settlement expansion. For Christian Zionists, it's a matter of faith. For critics, it's a geopolitical imbalance that fuels conflict. Israel faces serious accusations of committing apartheid and genocide, particularly in Gaza and the West Bank. The apartheid charge, leveled by human rights groups, argues that Israel's policies, settlements, movement restrictions, and separate legal systems for Israelis and Palestinians create a system of racial segregation and discrimination. In the West Bank, 700,000 Israeli settlers live under civilian law, with access to roads and resources, while Palestinians face military courts, checkpoints, and land confiscation. In Gaza, the blockade since 2007 has restricted movement and trade, isolating 2 million people. Critics argue this mirrors South Africa's apartheid, denying Palestinians equal rights. Israel rejects the apartheid label, insisting its policies are driven by security needs, not race. It points to Hamas's rocket attacks, suicide bombings, and tunnel infiltrations as justification for checkpoints and the blockade. Israel also notes that Arab citizens within its borders have voting rights and representation, though they face discrimination. The debate hinges on intent. Is Israel protecting itself or entrenching domination? The systemic inequalities, settlements fragmenting the West Bank, Gaza's isolation, are hard to dispute, but Israel argues they're temporary measures, not permanent apartheid. The genocide charge is more contentious, especially since the 2023 war. Critics, including South Africa in the 2024 case at the International Court of Justice, argue that Israel's actions in Gaza, over 40,000 deaths, widespread destruction, and aid blockades causing famine-like conditions, show intent to destroy Palestinians as a group, meeting the legal definition of genocide. A scale of civilian casualties, including thousands of children, and statements from Israeli officials calling for Gaza's erasure, fuel these claims. Israel vehemently denies genocide, arguing it targets Hamas, not civilians, and takes steps like issuing evacuation warnings and allowing some aid. Hamas's tactic of operating within civilian areas, Israel says, inflates casualties. Genocide requires proof of deliberate intent, a high bar that divides legal scholars. The humanitarian crisis is undeniable, but whether it's genocide depends on evidence of purpose still under scrutiny. Both charges reflect Palestinian suffering, but polarize debate. Apartheid seems closer to reality given structural policies, while genocide is less clear without definitive intent. Israel's defenders argue these labels oversimplify a complex conflict, ignoring its security threats. Palestinians see them as validation of their lived experience under occupation. Iran has emerged as a major player, escalating tensions with Israel. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's leaders have viewed Israel as an illegitimate state, calling it the Little Satan, and backing groups like Hamas and Hezbollah with weapons, training, and funds. Israel, in turn, has waged a shadow war, assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists between 2010 and 2020, launching cyber attacks like the Stuxnet virus on Iran's nuclear program, and targeting Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon. These tit-for-tat actions have kept the region on edge. In 2023, Iran-backed groups including Yemen's Houthis and Iraqi militias attacked Israel in solidarity with Hamas after the October 7th assault. The 2024 assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, widely attributed to Israel, was a bold escalation. Iran responded with missile strikes on Israeli targets, raising fears of a broader war. Hezbollah's rocket attacks from Lebanon, coordinated with Hamas, further strained Israel's northern border. This proxy war complicates peace, as Iran's ideological opposition to Israel's existence clashes with Israel's determination to neutralize threats. A chilling element of this conflict is the rhetoric from some Muslim leaders and groups calling for Israel's destruction, which deeply shapes Jewish fears. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has repeatedly called Israel a hideous entity that must be annihilated, framing it as a religious and political duty. Hamas's original 1988 charter advocated jihad to eliminate Israel, though its 2017 revision softened this, focusing on 1967 borders. Hezbollah's leaders echo Iran, vowing to erase Israel as part of a broader anti-Western struggle. These statements, rooted in anti-Zionism or religious eschatology, resonate with Jewish historical trauma. 1900 years of pogroms, expulsions, and genocide make such threats feel existential. Not all Muslims share this view. Many Palestinians, especially moderates aligned with the PLO, seek a state alongside Israel, not its destruction. But the loud voices of Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah dominate perceptions, convincing many Israelis that peace talks risk their survival. For Palestinians, these calls often reflect anger at occupation, not hatred of Jews as a people. Yet, the rhetoric fuels a cycle of fear and retaliation, making compromise harder. Before the 2023 war, Gaza was already a humanitarian disaster, shaped by Israel's blockade since 2007, when Hamas seized control. The blockade, enforced with Egypt's cooperation, restricted imports, exports, and movement, citing Hamas's rocket attacks and militant activities. Over 2 million Gazans lived in one of the world's densest places, with 81% below the poverty line and 63% dependent on food aid. Electricity was limited to 4 to 8 hours daily, forcing hospitals to ration power for critical equipment like ventilators. Over 95% of Gaza's water was undrinkable, causing health crises like kidney disease and child malnutrition. Fishing, a key livelihood, was confined to a narrow coastal zone, with Israeli patrols often firing on boats that strayed. Movement restrictions were suffocating. Israel controlled Gaza's border crossings, issuing few permits for travel, even for medical emergencies or education. Patients died waiting for approvals to seek treatment abroad, and students lost opportunities due to delays. Families were separated, unable to visit relatives in the West Bank or Israel. Periodic Israeli airstrikes, responding to Hamas rockets, killed hundreds of civilians between 2007 and 2023, with entire families wiped out in strikes meant to target militants. Hamas's authoritarian rule worsened the situation, with dissenters arrested and resources diverted to military tunnels and rockets. This collective punishment, as many human rights groups called it, fueled despair. Over 60% of Gazans were under 25, growing up amid war, trauma, and deprivation. Most had never left Gaza, knowing only a life of confinement and fear. Hamas's rocket attacks on Israeli civilians, often launched from crowded neighborhoods, invited devastating responses, trapping Gazans in a cycle of violence. Israel argued the blockade was necessary to prevent Hamas from bombing, but its impact on ordinary people, children, families, the elderly, drew global condemnation, setting the stage for the 2023 escalation. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a coordinated attack on southern Israel, killing over 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking 250 hostages. The assault, involving massacres at kibbutzim and a music festival, was the deadliest day in Israel's history, shocking a nation that prided itself on security. Hamas framed it as resistance to occupation. Israel saw it as terrorism, evoking memories of pogroms and Holocaust-era atrocities. Israel's response was massive, a relentless bombing campaign and ground invasion of Gaza that by mid-2025 has killed over 40,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials, and displaced nearly the entire population of 2 million. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, with hospitals, schools, and UN shelters hit. Famine looms as Israel restricts aid deliveries, citing concerns over Hamas diversion. Disease spreads in overcrowded tent camps, and children die from malnutrition. Israel says it targets Hamas infrastructure using precision strikes and warnings to minimize civilian deaths. But the scale of destruction, over 70% of Gaza's housing gone, has drawn accusations of war crimes. Hamas's tactic of operating within civilian areas complicates the battlefield, but critics argue Israel's response is disproportionate, punishing an entire population for Hamas's actions. This war didn't come out of nowhere. It's the culmination of decades of unresolved grievances: the Nakba's displacement, the 1967 occupation, the blockade strangulation, and the failure of peace talks. The Gaza crisis, pre-2023, poverty, trauma, and confinement, created a pressure cooker where militancy thrived. For Israelis, the October 7th attack confirmed their worst fears, justifying a hardline response. For Palestinians, the war's devastation is a new Nakba, reinforcing their narrative of victimhood. To make sense of this, let's step back and analyze both perspectives, striving for objectivity while honoring the emotions that drive them. The Palestinian perspective. Palestinians see themselves as victims of a century-long injustice, starting with the Balfour Declaration's promise of their land to another people. The Nakba displaced 700,000, and the 1967 occupation trapped millions under military rule. In Gaza, the blockade since 2007 turned life into a struggle for survival. No jobs, no water, no freedom. Settlements in the West Bank, now home to 700,000 Israelis, fragment any hope of a contiguous state. Hamas's militancy, while divisive, reflects frustration with the PLO's failed diplomacy and Israel's unyielding control. Calls for Israel's destruction, though extreme, stem from decades of dispossession, not inherent hatred of Jews. Palestinians want self-determination, a state of their own, but internal divisions, PLO versus Hamas, and external pressures like U.S. support for Israel make it feel impossible. The 2023 war, with its staggering death toll, feels like proof of their erasure, fueling both despair and defiance. The Israeli perspective. Israelis view their state as a miracle born from 1900 years of persecution. From medieval plague massacres to the Holocaust's genocide, Jews learned they could rely on no one for safety. The 1948 war, fought against 5 Arab armies, and the 2023 Hamas attack, with its brutal killings, reinforce the belief that enemies surround them. Hamas's rockets, Hezbollah's missiles, and Iran's threats evoke existential fears, justifying policies like the blockade and settlements, which many see as security buffers or biblical birthrights. American Christian support, rooted in prophecy, provides crucial aid, but it's Israel's own resolve, forged by pogroms and ovens, that drives its actions. Assassinations like Rabin's show even internal peace efforts face resistance. Israelis crave security, but fear concessions will embolden groups like Hamas, whose early rhetoric called for their annihilation. An objective lens. Both sides have legitimate claims and grievous faults. Palestinians have a right to self-determination, but Hamas's attacks on civilians and rejectionist rhetoric alienate potential allies. Israel has a right to exist and defend itself, but its settlement expansion and disproportionate military responses undermine moral credibility. The PLO's willingness to negotiate contrasts with Hamas and Hezbollah's militancy, yet all face Israel's overwhelming power, bolstered by U.S. and Christian Zionist support. Iran's proxy wars escalate tensions, but its rhetoric doesn't represent all Muslims, many of whom seek peace. The apartheid charge highlights real inequalities. Settlements and checkpoints create a two-tier system, but Israel argues security trumps all. Genocide claims, while reflecting Gaza's horrific toll, hinge on unproven intent, polarizing debate. Assassinations from Rabin to Yassin show how violence kills hope. Both sides are trapped in a cycle where fear justifies extremism, and external actors, Iran, the U.S., complicate solutions. The human cost is staggering. Palestinians mourn children lost to airstrikes, families displaced, dreams of statehood crushed. Israelis grieve for victims of bombings, hostages taken, and the constant dread of attack. Both feel history has wronged them, and neither trust the other to compromise. Objectivity doesn't erase these emotions. It demands we see them clearly, acknowledging the pain without excusing the atrocities it breeds. Gaza's story is a tapestry of competing truths, a Jewish haven born from centuries of suffering, a Palestinian dispossession rooted in broken promises and lost homes. From the 1858 land laws that opened Palestine to Jewish settlers, to the Hussein McMahon betrayal that fueled Arab distrust, to the 2023 war's devastation, this conflict has been shaped by nationalism, anti-Semitism, and power struggles. The expulsion of Jews from Muslim countries like Iran mirrors the Palestinian Nakba, showing parallel losses. Violent conflicts from 1948 to 2023 have entrenched division, while assassinations have killed peace at every turn. American Christian Zionism sustains Israel, but Palestinian suffering, Gaza's pre-2023 crisis of poverty and confinement, demands attention. Charges of apartheid and genocide reflect real grievances but spark debate over fairness. Iran's threats and calls for Israel's annihilation deepen Jewish fears, yet many Palestinians seek coexistence, not destruction. There are no easy answers. The PLO, Hamas, and Hezbollah represent different paths, but none have broken the stalemate. Peace efforts Camp David, Oslo, the Abraham Accords have faltered, and the two-state solution feels like a fading dream. Yet voices on both sides, Palestinian poets, Israeli peace activists, ordinary people, still dream of a future where children don't grow up in fear. Understanding this history from its 19th century roots to today's rubble is the first step toward imagining that future. It's a heavy story, but facing it honestly is the only way forward. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation respectful and open. I'm Machine Pun Kelly, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me on this journey through a complex and painful history. If you found this video insightful, please hit that like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.